very excited to be joined with Farhan Lalji today. Thank you very much for joining us, Farhan.
My pleasure, Anthony.
Fantastic. So obviously football is a very big part of your life now. You're obviously big time sports every day, all the time. But let's go back to when it started. How did you get started with sport? Where did you grow up? And how did kind of football take the lead with you?
Well, I was born in Africa, in Tanzania, and then moved here when I was 4. And, when you come in as an immigrant, I mean, there's a cultural acclimatization period that not just yourself, but your family needs to go through, right? So when I was a very young kid, I played soccer because, my father understood that, right? So he allowed that. And then I used to beg when I realized hockey was such a big deal to let me play hockey. And I never got to play minor hockey until the 6th grade. So I played for a couple of years, and I think the early morning practices kind of waned on them a little bit. So that didn't last too long. And I've tried a lot of different sports, and football is something that always really appealed to me. I've told a story before that I think not having Christmas, because my parents' religion, they're Ismaili Muslims, and they didn't believe in Christmas. So growing up, I didn't have a Christmas. So my Christmas day was spent watching college football. So the game really kind of took to me, and you'd watch it on holidays, and I was fascinated by the equipment, and just they looked like gladiators, and it just seemed like a real cool thing to me growing up. So when I got a chance to play, which wasn't until the 10th grade, I really, really enjoyed it. I kind of, had an ability to catch the football, at that time compared to my friends who really didn't play football. So maybe I wasn't that good. I just kind of felt I was because none of them were playing. But either way, the game really stuck with me, and I stuck to it for a very long time.
So what high school did you go to? And then what was that like playing on your high school team?
I went to Burnaby Central, and we were just starting the program, right? They didn't have a program for about 3 years. And then when I began in 1984, Alex Reed, who was a teacher at the school, brought the program back. So we were starting from scratch. We had a couple of kids that had never played before. Most of us were all just a bunch of misfits. And I remember, the end of my first year, we finally won a game, and we played at McNair High School, and it was just raining so bad, and we were losing at halftime, and our coach walked into the locker room. I remember it like it was yesterday, and he just looked at us and walked out. And we just, we went out there in the second half and played really well and won the football game. And then, got better in my grade 12 year, and we wound up making the playoffs. And, more than anything else, it was just being a part of a group like that had just so many, diverse cultures and, ethnicities, but, financial variances, and just all of that really appealed to me. And really my coach, I mentioned Alex Reed, he was my mentor. And so I just wanted to be around him really more than anything. So I just, when high school ended, I played junior football and spent a year with Simon Fraser University as well. But while I was doing all of that, I continued to coach, and that was, it just became a big part of my life. And again, originally it started just because I wanted to continue to be around him, because of what he meant to me. And then it just kind of became a lifetime passion, borderline obsession.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, the obsession part, we're all kind of familiar with. So you end up deciding you're going to coach right after you play junior, and you go to Simon for a year. What other than hanging out with your coach, what else got you kind of excited to get going and really, try giving back?
Well, I think more than anything else, I wanted to, I've had friends from the time joke, they just said you didn't really want to graduate high school. So you enjoyed high school so much, you just wanted to stay in the environment. Maybe that's true, I don't know. But, I think as much as anything else, I wanted to build the program that I wanted to be in, right? And while I had a fantastic head coach, the program itself wasn't very comprehensive. It didn't, it didn't touch a lot of different elements besides football, right? So, when I went through university and I was around the SFU program for a bunch of years, and then I was the sports information director there, and then I got exposed to football kind of on a broader scale, right? Through other college coaches I had a chance to get to know, and then I got involved, in the mid 90s as a builder here, on the board of BC high school football, and I'd start attending clinics, and I got to know so many people, and I just learned more about the game on a broader scale. So I think that was the big thing. It was the family atmosphere that came with football, the game itself. But again, it was that desire to create the program I always wanted to play in, and I've said to people, I don't always have good ideas, but I rarely ever have a small idea, right? So when we started the program, I coached at Burnaby Central, and I was an assistant, and it was okay. And then eventually he retired, and I was asked by a few people to take over the program, and I chose not to. And I was an assistant for a couple of years, under some other people, and it didn't fit anymore. So then I just decided to make the leap on my own and start my own program at New West, which we did in 2003. And it's been, one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had personally or professionally.
Fantastic. So we're going to get to that in a second. That's a huge chapter in the journey. Obviously, let's go back. What'd you go to university for, and what'd you graduate with?
Well, I went to Simon Fraser, majored in communications, and at the time I didn't know that I'd get into broadcasting. There was an internship I wanted to get at Simon Fraser as their media relations director for athletics. So, communications seemed like a good path to get that, and that job itself seemed like it would be a really good launch point for other things, because it had been for so many people that had it before I did, right? So that was the main thing. I went to SFU, and I, while I majored in communications, I probably got more out of just being a part of a campus community and what that entails, and I volunteered for the campus newspaper and for the campus radio station, and, just tried to network, and that stuff is as much an important part of my story as sitting in classes, right? So, I think in communications, you get taught to think very critically, but I'm not sure there's a lot of practical applications to it if you want to get into broadcasting, which at that time wasn't my goal. I thought at some point I'd be in media relations for a pro team or for a company, or wind up doing that. And then I just really kind of fell into broadcasting. But I started at Douglas College, did 3 semesters there, not knowing what I wanted to do other than going to university. And then I got to university, tried out for the football team, and then I got hurt. But then I got into this, was able to get into this position right as I was finishing up school. And that really changed my life a lot.
Absolutely. So you graduate from Simon, you get your communications degree. What's the next step for you? Obviously, for me, you've always been, one of the main people that we see on TV giving us our information on sports. So that's
making you feel old now.
No, well, I was born in '85, so your story kind of did that. But anyway, let's stay focused. You're a very young man, so you play. You finished your degree. Now, what kind of gets you to that next level of your journey?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I worked at the university after finishing school. So 91 to 94, I was the sports information director, and I just networked. I obviously got to know all of the media in the city really, really well, and went on the road with Barry McDonald when Sports Page was going on, and he was also working at CBC briefly. And the people at Global at the time, back then it was BCTV, and CBC had a much larger sports footprint. TSN didn't exist, or it did, but it didn't necessarily have a huge local presence, right? But then ironically, David Pratt, who worked for TSN at the time, in '94 offered me a job producing his radio show. So I left SFU after 3 years to go do that, and producing the show also meant doing updates for the show on air. And then that year the Canucks were going to the Stanley Cup final, so we had a string of replacement hosts to fill in whenever Dave would travel. Well, all of a sudden, none of them were available because some of them were traveling too, right? I mean, as the playoffs went deeper, and next thing you know, I had to host this show, and I was freaking out that I had to host a 4-hour radio show, and I did it, and I sucked. I really did. But I felt like I loved it, and at that point I was kind of hooked, and I'm like, I want to do this more. And I wound up having to do it more during that run, and I got better at it. And then the station made a format change in December of that year. So that job lasted about 9 months. But then Barry McDonald, who is another, really great mentor of mine, was going from CBC back to Sports Page. And they needed somebody at CBC. So they hired me, I don't want to say sight unseen, but pretty close. They hired me to anchor the weekend news and report during the week. And I had never read a teleprompter. Again, I'd never taken a broadcasting course in my life at that point. And all of a sudden, here I am anchoring the weekend news at CBC in a major market. And again, kind of the same story. I went in and did a dry run, just in terms of the mechanics of the show and being on the teleprompter. And I was awful. But they hired me anyway. And, I got better fast. And then 2 years later, TSN expanded. They opened up a Western Broadcast Center in Vancouver. You know, the Grizzlies were here, and you know, the whole sports landscape was changing and growing. So they hired me then, and it was kind of a combination on-air, off-air, hosting position, and then, you know, a couple months into it, it became full-time on-air, and you know, here I am 20 some odd years later.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, it's worked out pretty good. So you get going with that, and then simultaneously in 2003 you decide, let's go to New West and let's see what we can do with this football. So what was kind of the motivation behind it? And then what were like, you get there and obviously there's a lot of stuff to get done. What's it like to kind of see the hurdles that are ahead of you and kind of getting the steps in place to take advantage of it?
Well, you know, it started when I left Burnaby Central. I spent 2 years coaching at Vancouver College, you know, and they've got a fabulous program, and Todd Burnett does a fabulous job as the head coach. And consequently, you know, I kind of felt like I wasn't doing enough. I felt like I wasn't needed. And, you know, during those 2 years are probably the two most active years I've had with the BC High School Football Board of Directors, right? So, I helped launch the Subway Bowl, and then we had a national TV deal at the time with Sportsnet that I helped kind of put together. And so I was really involved there because I felt I wasn't doing enough in a single program. So I kind of got to the point where I felt that if I didn't start my own program or become a head coach, that I'd eventually just get away from coaching, because, you know, I'm kind of an all-in or an all-out guy, right? So there were a few programs that had approached me about taking over, and, you know, my wife at the time was my girlfriend, and we were talking about it. She's like, you know what? She said, don't clean up anyone else's mess. Go create your own mess, for lack of a better description. Like, start your own thing and your own vision. And she was right, because it's really, really cool to take something from an idea that doesn't exist and to have a vision and then to see it come to existence, you know? And so when I started in 2003, not only was there no football culture in New West, but, like, you know, way back then, you know, but there was a jersey brand called FUBU. I don't know if you remember it. It was kind of this urban wear brand, and everybody used to wear it, even if you knew nothing about football. So not only did people not wear NFL or CFL jerseys or throw the ball around in the city, people didn't even wear FUBU jerseys. That's how, you know, dead and bereft the city of New Westminster was for football. So to start it, have this idea, start a high school team, start a youth team, have big events, you know, it really worked out okay, because the city is very much a small town. There's a lot of pride in the high school because it's the only one. The stadium is a really perfect setup for it that we have at Mercer Stadium. So everything kind of came together that year that we started. They decided to turf and light the stadium. Before, it was kind of this underused, bad grass patch. So it all kind of came together. And now when you see the excitement people have at our games and the amount of people playing it in the community and things like that, it's kind of cool to see it go from zero, just an idea, to something, you know, when we went to the provincial championship in 2017 and 2018, we couldn't get enough tickets. Like, people were constantly, like, there was a barrage. We had businesses around town asking to sell our tickets because it would increase traffic flow to them. Like, it was so cool to see it kind of culminate. I mean, it took a while to get to that point, but just the interest and the passion people in our city have for our program is pretty unique.
You know, it's funny because I was talking to Howard Samara the other day, and he was telling me how high school sports used to sell out. You know, like there were sellouts, and, you know, you had, you know, Richmond Colts back in the day and all this stuff. And it's like, and the newspapers, you know, he started writing in the local news, and there was full dedicated pages. And I'm like, I really think there's room for that. Like, I know that magazines and newspapers have kind of cut everybody off from youth sport, and they're not really covering it very much. But I mean, realistically, the fact that to this day, you got local businesses telling you, we think we'd get some traffic or we would get some football. It's just a matter of doing it properly and setting up the infrastructure. I mean, you know, it's funny because being a football coach is essentially being a CEO of an organization. And so you gotta build the ground level, and then you got to kind of grow it up as it gets bigger. So, but when you got there, what was like the biggest thing you were like, oh my goodness, we need to dramatically change this?
You know, I don't know that there was a thought of changing, right? I mean, it was just a thought of, again, going back to my first reason in terms of, you know, when I got involved first coaching, like, I always wanted to build the program that I wanted to be in. And I just felt that, you know, it's people look at what's happening in the States, like prior to this year, and there's certainly a lot of envy about the tradition that high school sports has in various American communities, and there's just a belief that we can't do that here. And I'm not interested in the word can't when it comes to, a lot of things in my life, but certainly that for sure. I just felt that, tradition has to start somewhere. So you have to have an idea, you have to empower people around you, you have to give them ownership of your idea. And you've got to be specific and deliberate, right? Like, it's really easy to have a big idea, but to not be able to break it down in terms of how you're going to execute it. And it's hard, right? I mean, look, we've all got lives, we've got children, we've got other responsibilities. I mean, I'm a volunteer coach, and, unfortunately, there just aren't enough teacher coaches anymore, right? And the climate doesn't allow for people to be hired because they're, even if they've got teaching qualifications, to come in because they want to coach, right? So, it's tough to watch. That's the hardest part for me, province-wide. I mean, I think in football, we're over 80% volunteer, non-teaching coaches. And I just think if you're in the school infrastructure, back then, or in the US, I mean, it's those people that do it, right? It's teachers that coach. They see the value of sport in education. They're rewarded for that, whether it's their stipends or community support or things like that. I mean, they get that down in the US, but they build it. So now what happens with us is I get people coming to me and they're like, well, you have everything, because they see the support and the interest we have. And I said, no, we had nothing. We built everything, right? And that's what people have to wrap their head around, that it doesn't come easy. You can see the finished product and say, oh, wow, you're in a great situation. But I think it's mindset, and you have to put yourself in that situation. Like when I started there, the first thing I said to myself was, the principal and the athletic director are going to be my best friends. Like, literally, they're going to be my best friends. And 2 years later, I got married and they were at my wedding. And fortunately, they were great people. So it wasn't like it was a stretch, but there was a mindset there that no matter what, I was going to like them and they were going to like me. And I was going to make sure I did whatever it took to get their support, right? And so that's kind of a mindset thing. And if you have a breakdown of how you want to execute it, and you empower people, because nobody can do it alone. And sometimes that means not just having a vision, but sharing a vision or creating a joint vision. So for me, it wasn't about change. It was about, build from the ground up. And I think that was the most intriguing and exciting part, but also the most rewarding part when it all happened, because again, I didn't want anything small. The reason, like, I went to Kits High School and pitched the program to them at the time. They were interested. I went to New West and I pitched it. And they actually seemed less interested at the time, but really they were, more than anything, they were just kind of doing their due diligence, and they went and checked my background and references and found out more. And then the second they said yes, they were all in. And I picked New West more because I thought it had a better chance to succeed. Like I've always said it's a suburb with a small town feel, as opposed to in Kitts, you're like in the middle of Vancouver, right? And the stadium and all those things. And I just kind of was able to picture what I wanted it to look like being there, and then just kind of went about making it happen.
It's funny. Honestly, there was going to be a big vote with BC School Sports about, bringing in different things and a whole bunch of different stuff. And you're talking about 80% volunteers in football. I mean, I think it's the same in other sports. It's not because, I'm a volunteer as well. It's not because, we kicked people out that were doing the job before we got there, right? Like,
yeah, right.
The teachers union has discouraged these people from doing this for years. They've been adamant about it. We don't want you coaching. And the coaches are like rebels. The teachers who coach, they're like rebelling against the system to actually give back and coach because they want to. And so it's kind of an interesting dynamic where we're being told now, we won't get into it too much, but realistically, we're being told, well, we want teachers in charge of this. And it's like, they were in charge. They didn't want to do it anymore. The ones that still want to do it, they're still in charge. It's like, we didn't kick anybody out to do this. Like, I'm not getting paid to do this. You're not getting paid to do this. We're doing it because we think building is important. And so it's kind of interesting to see the dynamic of that 80%. I've never seen actual data on it before. So that kind of, it's kind of hit me pretty good there.
Yeah, you're right. And if, it's always better to have school involvement, right? I mean, with our program, the third year where we had a program, we were able to get a teacher in the school, right? And that was a big help. And then a few years, like probably more recently, I want to say about 5 years ago, we were able at our school to make football curricular. And that allowed us to get another teacher hired. And that was critical to our success, because like, I just can't be there 24/7. I mean, I've got my own job that has requirements. So, to have that is important, but you're right. It's just so hard to do. And, you know, and I don't want to say the unions necessarily discourage it, but certainly when it comes to a job action situation, then they absolutely discourage it and almost demand that you don't do it, and then try to leverage what we do for the kids. So, you know, those are the times where it's really difficult to swallow, right? But certainly we'd all be in a better place if an administrator could go to a budding teacher and say, hey, do you want to coach? And if you do, I'd like to hire you, as opposed to being told the union situation just simply won't allow that. Because, you know, we always talk about whether or not the system should be staff-centered or student-centered. And right now, I think sometimes it's staff-centered. And I think that's unfortunate. I think it needs to be student-centered and bring in the best people for the kids. And student-centered means, you know, it means funding for existing teachers and support for existing teachers for sure. But I think sometimes if there's certain things that are specific to what a kid's needs are, and maybe people in the building can't provide that, let's find those who can.
Absolutely. Now, football provincials is obviously in probably the most unique place that you can have any sport, maybe in the country. And so let's talk about how that came to be, and then what it's like to play in a gigantic arena for you guys, and now the tradition that it seems to constantly keep going in.
Yeah, you know, it happened certainly before my time. You know, when Larry Rita was the executive director for BC High School football, they first started putting it in BC Place. I don't think it was right out of the gate when the stadium opened, but by the late 80s, they were playing here, and it really has become a staple. The kids love it. And you know, we spend a lot of money, or we invest a lot of money to make it happen. Generally, we still turn a profit, right? I don't know if we're going to be able to execute BC Place this year, given the finances around the virus and things of that nature. But I do know that long term, we do want to be in BC Place, because it really does add to the kids' experience. You get the best football when you get there. You know, certainly there'll be those who say, you know, it's not great having an empty stadium, because, you know, when even if you put 5,000 people in there, it looks empty. But I'll tell you what, having been there for big games and participated in big games, it sounds loud. You know, I mean, it feels big when you're there, and you just get to be in that professional environment. I mean, you know, in a perfect world, like you look at high school basketball, I think the Agrodome has been such a staple of their success, and now the LEC, because you've got that perfectly sized venue where you can fill it, right? And you have that atmosphere. But I think if you get to playoffs at BC Place, the atmosphere there, especially in the championship, winds up being pretty good too. Absolutely.
So you started the program at US. You obviously got to build. Now you start competing for championships. What it's like to try to get over the hurdle and then finally winning that championship after all those years, after putting in all that work?
Well, truthfully, it took longer than I'd hoped, and the reason for that is that in 2005 we had moved up to AAA that year, and we had a really good team, and you know, we couldn't get over the hump, and then we had a run in like 07, 08, 09, like very quickly out of the gate, right? Where we were in the provincial semis all 3 years, and, you know, almost got to the final on a couple of those. And it really felt like we were trending that way. So in 2010, we kind of took a step back for a couple of years and had to rebuild. So it made 17 that much more rewarding, right? To finally get it done. And again, I thought it would happen sooner, but, you know, in this province, when you get to those final 4 or 5 teams, they're all really, really good. And it really becomes kind of a battle of attrition, who's healthy at the right time, and all of those kinds of things. Because when you get to that point, there's just no weak teams. And, you know, so when you finally can get over the hump in 17 and winning the title in the way we won it, you know, in pretty dramatic fashion, and then also to get back there in 18 was really important as well, because it helped validate kind of where we were as a program. But, you know, in 15 and 16, we were in the semis, knocking on the door, and then, you know, to finally win it, it was pretty rewarding. And that team had a lot of pressure, because in 15, that team won the JV title. So, you know, they kind of felt it that year. They were unbeaten that year. And, you know, there were some heart-stopping finishes in the playoffs for us to finally get there. But, you know, and, you know, when I got back into the locker room, you know, we had the on-field celebration and we got the awards and everything. And then I went into the locker room, and, you know, people talk about your phone blowing up. And it was one of the most rewarding things to have so many alumni from the first, you know, dozen years of the program all reaching out. You know, people from all over the country in the football community that knew me, collegiate coaches, you know, CFL people. Like it was pretty cool. Like just the response that the whole thing got, right? So you know, it's I wear the ring with pride for sure.
It's very cool. So now let's let's go back. Let's take an opportunity to, if you could go back in time and give a younger version of Farhan, you're still very young, but if you could give a younger version of Farhan a little bit of advice and say, hey, maybe take a look at this. You might want to just kind of do this maybe. What are your thoughts that you might give that guy?
Well, I think it took me a while to understand shared leadership, right, and shared vision. So I think that would probably be the biggest thing that I would talk to people about, and also not to create excuses. Like I do a program building presentation, and I put up a picture of Bear Bryant, and next to it on either side I've got Joe Namath and Ken Stabler, right, who both played for Bear Bryant at the University of Alabama. And I come into this era where I hear people telling me that, oh, kids aren't like that anymore. Kids are different. And so I put this picture up because those two guys in college playing for a coach who was absolutely revered. Like in the state of Alabama, Bear Bryant wasn't the coach. He was God, right? Like he was more important than Jesus in the state of Alabama, in the 60s. And yet these two guys who were complete rebels, would smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, carouse, you name it, they bought in. You know what I mean? And everybody says, well, they were different. And no. People were wayward back then too. Woodstock happened in the 60s. So, we have to realize that people are always curious. People are always trying to push boundaries and explore themselves, and you have to allow that, right? So, I think there was a time when I tried to control a lot of that, right? From what I expected of kids to what the vision was for other people. I think you need to share. I think you need to evolve. The one thing I know about kids is that kids still want leadership. They just want to believe in their leaders, and they want to believe the leaders have their back. So if you learn that early, a player's coach is not someone who lets their kids get away with something. It's a coach who players believe truly loves them and cares about them. And if you can make it about that, you've got a better chance to succeed. And if you can make it about that, you also have a better chance to have buy-in, right? But, giving advice is fleeting, Anthony, because here's one thing I've learned. When I was a kid at one point, my dad said to me, I don't want you to drink. I don't want you to do this. I don't want you to do that. And I said to him, these are my mistakes to make. And I think, I'm going to get a test of that with my own son and my own daughter, because they're going to make mistakes. But
let's see what happens if your son tells you that. I'm sure that'll go
right. For sure. I think that I probably was able to get to where I got eventually coaching-wise by making mistakes early and trying to make it about me and trying to be somebody I wasn't, or watching a coach's video and say, okay, I want to be that guy. And I think that you just have to go through it, right? You can't just sit there and you can't be perfect day one, and I'm not perfect now. But I think if you can, for me, one of the best coaching lines I've ever been given was, you don't coach football, you coach kids. Like football just happens to be the language, or in your case, it's basketball or what have you, right? So as long as you understand that and you constantly make that what you're trying to get accomplished and who you want to relate to, it's not X's and O's. It's just figure out the kids, and they'll want to be there for you, right? Like they'll want to be around you. They'll want to buy in because they just believe you've got their back. They just believe you care about them, right? So I think those are the main things. And the other thing is that it probably, if I could give one advice, it's don't waver on your standards. Like if you expect this of kids, then you got to hold them accountable to that, and don't give in, because if you give in early, they're going to take advantage of you really quickly in big numbers. So I think you have to stay true to that part of it. That if kids' grades matter, if kids' behavior matters, if that's number one for you, then you better make sure you do everything you can to make sure they have that, because if they don't have that, everything else will fall apart, right? So those are kind of the main things.
Absolutely. It's funny because people tell me all the time, kids don't care as much anymore. They're not as smart anymore. I'm like, no, man, they're smarter than they've ever been. They've got the ability to get information anytime they want. They can check if you're bullshitting them. They can find out real quick. I think kids are smarter than they've ever been. Now,
I think it's up to us to figure out their language.
They have more options than they've ever had. And so you have to put together an appealing product. And if you don't, they're just going to do something else, because when we were growing up, we didn't have a million options. Well, they do now. And so you better come to them with something that they feel inspired to do, and they feel excited to do. And I totally agree with you. That's a huge point. The point you brought about standards, when I had coached a team, we lost in the provincial final a while ago. It'll probably stick with me forever, but we lost in the provincial final, and I look back at it, right, and I'm like, like, what did we do wrong there? Like, we should have won. We put all this time in, this, that, and the other, and I was like, I let them off the hook by not pushing even harder. Like, I think they were capable of a little bit more, and they gave everything that I had asked for. And then so it was like, maybe I should have pushed a little harder. They would have given it. You know what I mean? Like, if you ask, you'd be surprised. Kids will go that extra yard. So I really appreciate that point. Now, last question for you. If you, what are some of the obstacles you have to overcome to get to the place that you're at? We'll go on the football field, and then we'll go in the media business. So, we all have to overcome some obstacles to get to the spots that we're at, if you want to get anywhere meaningful anyway. And so you've gotten to those places. What are some of the bigger obstacles you have to overcome to get to those places?
I'm not sure. I don't know that we've had, huge obstacles in our program for the most part. I mean, we may be encountering some now with the way the world is currently, but I think you kind of need to use a lot of that stuff as learning opportunities, right? I mean, I talk to other coaches, and, they talk about finances, and we certainly have raised a lot of money from the beginning, community support. I don't know that I've viewed it as obstacles. I think maybe the biggest thing is just trying to, build a resource base, to get as much help as you need. And I think the farther along you go, the more help you realize that you need, especially if you want, your program to operate at a certain level. But, I don't know that I've described a lot of things as obstacles. Certainly there's been a lot of challenges, but, I guess I tend to view obstacles as something that's a little more negative, right? And challenges are a little more positive, I suppose. Maybe it's just in the wording, but I just think that, getting people, you're always trying to get more coaches. You're always trying to get people to take on more and to allow you to grow. One thing I do believe, I think the biggest obstacle we've had is the concussion situation as a sport. And, and our program is no different. And I don't know that it's, I think the issue of concussions, it was really important early on that the sport admit that there was something going on and work to fix it. Now it's more the narrative, because I think we've done such a good job of trying to create, a more safer situation around players. But what I do find, I think right now is, as a result of that, as a result of, parents' economic situations and what a tough place financially the Lower Mainland is to live, I think the kids have challenges and obstacles. And I think as a coach, I think I probably was finding myself doing twice the amount of work to achieve the same results. Like I had to promote, build these, elementary school flag football tournaments and go to PE classes and teach and do all this extra stuff just to get the same number of kids out playing. So I think the challenges of others have forced me to work harder. So if you want to view that as an obstacle or a challenge, that's probably the biggest one. I think overall, the first 10 years of our program, all the work I put in, you could see exponential growth. And now all the additional work you put in, you don't necessarily see the growth. You're trying to just achieve the same results in terms of number of kids and what you're trying to get accomplished. So I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Well, thanks a lot for joining us today. I think it can be inspiring for some of the young up-and-coming coaches who are trying to get started and know that it's possible, and you just got to put in the work. And I think what I've gotten from you is a CEO mindset. Like you're literally running a business here. And there's all these layers, and you got to set up the infrastructure. And if you don't, it's just not going to work. So thank you so much for putting the time in, and we really appreciate it. And we'll see you soon.
Hey, thanks for everything you do as well.
Thanks, Brian. Awesome, man.
All right, bud.